The air in the room thickened, heavy with a silence that pressed down on my chest, stealing the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Across the polished expanse of the mahogany desk, his eyes, once the kindest I knew, were now chips of cold, hard stone. Beside him, she sat, a ghost in my life made flesh, her smile a slow, venomous bloom spreading across her lips. It wasn't just her presence that struck me, not just the sickening familiarity of the scene playing out in the heart of the business we'd built, but the utter lack of remorse in his gaze. He leaned back slightly in the chair I'd helped pick out years ago, a chair that now seemed to mock me with its plush comfort, and spoke the words I already knew were coming, yet they landed like a physical blow, shattering the last fragile pieces of a life I thought was solid. "I'm marrying Victoria," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth, any history, any echo of the promises whispered under starry skies. "You get nothing." Just like that. The sentence hung in the air, vibrating with a cruelty that felt impossible coming from him. My throat closed. My vision swam. The opulent office, the view of the city skyline we'd dreamed over, everything blurred into an indistinct watercolor of pain and disbelief. Nothing. After 15 years. After the late nights, the sacrificed weekends, the shared dreams poured into the very foundation of this company. Nothing. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. My fingers tightened around the arms of my chair, the wood digging into my palms, grounding me in the spinning room. Nothing. It was more than a statement of financial intent. It was a complete erasure of my existence, of my contribution, of us. He didn't just want to leave. He wanted to annihilate the memory of me from the narrative of his success. And she watched, her eyes gleaming, a silent accomplice in this act of demolition. The silence stretched again, but this time it was different. It wasn't heavy with shock. It was taut, humming with a nascent, dangerous energy. Something inside me that had just been broken began to harden, piece by agonizing piece. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. We met in a bookstore. Cliché, I know. But it felt like fate at the time. His fingers brushed mine, reaching for the same worn copy of a classic novel. We talked for hours that first night, sitting on the floor of the cafe section until they ushered us out. He was ambitious, charming, full of ideas. I was practical, grounded, and saw the potential in his chaotic brilliance. He had the vision. I had the structure, the patience for the details he found tedious. We were a balance, a perfect, complementary set of skills and temperaments that, everyone said, made us unstoppable. The business started small. A cramped office above a noisy bar. Rent was cheap, but the dreams were expensive. We poured everything into it. Not just money, but our lives. Our first date nights were spent brainstorming over takeout menus spread across sticky desktops. Our first anniversary was marked by landing a major client, celebrated with cheap champagne in paper cups. While he was the face, the one shaking hands and making speeches, I was the engine. I built the systems, managed the finances, hired the first employees, handled the crises he was too impatient to navigate. I was the steady hand on the wheel while he chased the horizon. We weren't just partners in life. We were partners in this venture. Or so I believed. Every long night I spent hunched over spreadsheets. Every tense negotiation I smoothed over. Every employee conflict I resolved with quiet diplomacy. It was all for us. For the future we were building. We bought the house with the big garden, picked out furniture together, talked about kids, about growing old, and watching the business thrive, a legacy of our shared effort. The business wasn't just his, it was our third child, nurtured by both of us. Looking back now, I see the cracks. Tiny fissures I ignored, explained away, minimized. The late nights that stretched longer, the business trips that became more frequent, the subtle shift in his gaze when I asked about his day. He was always busy, always stressed. The business, he said, demanded everything. And I accepted that. I was busy too, managing the household, supporting his public image, still handling parts of the business operations he'd shed as he grew. I was the foundation, stable and hopefully invisible, while he was the glittering facade. The first time I heard her name, it was casual. Victoria in marketing, he'd mentioned. Then, Victoria on the Smith account, always professional, always distant. I never suspected. Why would I? We had history. We had the business. We had a life. The idea of him seeking solace or excitement elsewhere simply didn't compute. Our life was full. It was ours. The truth arrived not with a bang, but a slow, agonizing drip. A misplaced phone, a glowing screen showing messages that weren't work-related. Plans for dinners I wasn't invited to, terms of endearment meant for someone else. My blood ran cold. The world stopped spinning. The air grew thin. I confronted him, my voice trembling, the phone feeling like a lead weight in my hand. He didn't deny it, didn't beg for forgiveness. He looked tired, impatient, like I was a problem to be solved, not a heart he was breaking. It's been going on for a while, he admitted, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. She understands me in a way you don't anymore. Understand him? I'd spent 15 years understanding him. Understanding his moods, his ambitions, his fears. Understanding the unspoken language of his silences. What did she understand that I didn't? Did she understand the years of struggle? The moments of doubt? The sacrifices? Or did she just understand how to make him feel young and desired? The conversation was short, brutal. He was already mentally gone. He saw a future with her, a future where I was a relic of a past he wanted to forget. The business he made clear even then was his. His name was on the registration papers from day one, a detail I never questioned, never thought twice about. We were married. Community property. Or so the naive part of me believed. Then came that meeting in the office. The one where he delivered the final blow.
I'm marrying Victoria.
You get nothing. The days that followed were a blur of raw, unadulterated pain. The house felt hollow, echoing with the silence where laughter and conversation used to be. Every object was a cruel reminder. The couch where we'd watched movies, the kitchen table where we'd planned our future, the bed that now felt vast and empty. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. My mind replayed his words, her smug smile, the coldness in his eyes. Nothing. It wasn't just the financial threat. It was the complete invalidation of my existence. He was telling me I was worthless, that my years of dedication meant precisely zero. I tried to find solid ground, but the earth kept shifting beneath my feet. I consulted lawyers. The first few were sympathetic but cautious. His name is on everything. The business structure is complex. It will be a fight I was already too weary to wage. The idea of dissecting our life, item by painful item, felt soul-crushing. The thought of sitting across from him in a courtroom, reducing 15 years to balance sheets and asset lists, was unbearable. He didn't make it easy. He changed the locks on the office I used to freely enter. He froze joint accounts, leaving me with limited access to funds that were, in theory, half mine. He used the business, the thing we built together, as a weapon. Employees I had hired, mentored, even become friends with, suddenly couldn't meet my eye in the street. They were afraid. Afraid of him, afraid for their jobs. I was isolated, cut off from the world that had been my life for so long. Every call from a lawyer felt like another blow. Legal fees mounted. The uncertainty was a constant, gnawing anxiety. How would I live? Where would I go? What about the house? He seemed determined to bleed me dry, financially and emotionally, until I had no choice but to walk away with absolutely nothing. He wanted me to disappear. Victoria, I heard through whispers from mutual acquaintances, the few who still spoke to me openly, was already playing the part of the lady of the manor, advising him on business decisions, redecorating the office, planning their lavish wedding. They were building their future on the ashes of mine, and it burned with a slow, steady heat in my gut. The injustice of it was a physical weight. I remembered a phrase he used to use back when we were young and full of fire. Never bring a knife to a gunfight. He had brought a gun. A whole arsenal, lawyers, money, control of the business narrative, a new, shiny partner. I had a lifetime of shared memories and a rapidly dwindling bank account. It felt like bringing nothing to a war. My father called. He'd heard things. Not from me, I was too ashamed, too broken to talk about it. But word travels in small circles, especially when one half of a prominent local couple is suddenly erased. My father is a quiet man, not prone to grand gestures or emotional outbursts. He built his own business, a successful, old money kind of operation, steady, reliable, powerful beneath the surface. He just listened for a long time as I finally, haltingly, told him everything. The betrayal, the fear, the humiliation, the sheer, paralyzing unfairness of it all. When I finished, the line was silent for a moment. I braced myself for pity, for quiet disapproval of my choices, for the inevitable "I told you so" that parents are entitled to, even if unspoken. Instead, he just said very softly, "He told you you get nothing." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a precision that cut through the fog of my despair. "Yes," I whispered, the word raw in my throat. "And he's using the business to bury you," my father continued, his voice still quiet, but with an edge I hadn't heard before. "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. I could almost hear him thinking, processing, calculating. My father is a strategist. He plays chess, not checkers. He sees moves 10 steps ahead. I waited, holding my breath. "Okay," he finally said. "Okay." That was it. Not a plan. Not an offer of help. Just, "Okay," but in that single word, I felt a shift. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor beneath the crumbling ground I stood on. It wasn't comfort. It was something far more potent. It was the sound of a door closing on the past and another, heavy, steel door slowly creaking open. He started asking questions. Not about my feelings, not about the details of the betrayal that still choked me, but about the business. His business. The one he said was his alone. He wanted to know about its structure, its clients, its suppliers, its debt. He asked about the market, about its growth potential, about its vulnerabilities. My father wasn't asking as a concerned parent anymore. He was asking as a businessman, a predator, sizing up his prey. I found myself talking, pulling out old records, explaining systems I had put in place, describing key relationships I had built over the years. Details I had almost forgotten, buried under layers of pain, surfaced. I knew that business inside and out. I knew its strengths, but more importantly, I knew its weaknesses. I knew the leverage points. I knew where the bodies were buried, figuratively speaking. I was no longer just a discarded wife. I was an unwilling informant, providing the map to the kingdom I had helped build. As I talked, something strange happened. The raw, debilitating pain began to recede slightly, replaced by a colder, sharper emotion. Anger. A white-hot, purifying rage that burned away the humiliation and despair. He wanted to erase me? He wanted me to get nothing? He wanted to use the business as his weapon and his shield? Fine. Let him try. But he didn't know who he was up against. He didn't know the quiet force I could be when pushed. And he definitely didn't know my father. My father listened patiently, asking clarifying questions, his mind working furiously. We had dinners, not as father and daughter, but as two strategists planning a complex maneuver. He spoke in terms of acquisitions, market share, hostile takeovers. Concepts that seemed alien in the context of my shattered marriage, yet chillingly relevant. He told me his initial thoughts. His business was solid, well-funded. He could acquire a controlling interest in a competitor, or perhaps a supplier. He could squeeze my husband's company from the outside. It was a long game, potentially years of market pressure, legal battles, financial warfare. It was a way to inflict damage, to make his life difficult, to force him to the negotiating table from a position of weakness. It felt unsatisfyingly abstract. It wasn't direct enough. It didn't feel like justice for "you get nothing." Then, late one night, After hours of poring over financials I'd managed to gather, some legally, some less so, leveraging old contacts who still had access, my father paused. He looked up from the spreadsheets, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. His debt, he said, his voice low. He's leveraged himself heavily, expanding too fast, taking on risk. I nodded. That sounded like him. Always chasing the next big deal, the next shiny object, sometimes without building the solid infrastructure to support it. I had always been the one urging caution, advocating for reserves, for slower, steadier growth. He'd called me risk-averse, said I didn't understand scaling. And these recent acquisitions, my father continued, tracing a finger across a line item. He paid a premium, used significant capital, and took out new loans. This was the crucial point. This was the vulnerability. He wasn't just successful. He was extended, like a high-wire walker leaning too far out, confident in his balance, unaware the wire was frayed. What if, my father said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face, a smile I'd only seen when he was closing a particularly challenging deal. What if we didn't just squeeze him? What if we bought him? All of it. The words hung in the air. Buy him? Buy his business? The one he was so sure was untouchable, the one he was using to strip me bare? My heart began to pound, a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. It felt impossible.
Daring. Terrifying.
And thrilling. Can you? I whispered, barely able to form the words. It would be complex, he admitted. Hostile acquisition. Would take speed, discretion. Leveraging relationships. Finding the right moment. But he wasn't saying no. He was saying it was possible. He saw the opportunity created by my husband's overconfidence and debt.
He saw a path.
A narrow, risky path, but a path nonetheless. This was the shift. This was the turning point. The initial plan was defense, survival, perhaps inflicting some pain. This new plan was conquest. Not just survival, but a complete reversal of fortunes. He said I get nothing? What if he ended up with nothing? What if I ended up with, well, not necessarily the business, but the ultimate, undeniable vindication? We worked in secret. Long nights in my father's study, the air thick with the smell of old paper and determination. We consulted his team of lawyers, corporate strategists, financial analysts. The complexity was immense. A hostile takeover required meticulous planning, stealth, and perfect timing. We couldn't let him get wind of it. If he knew, he could try to shore up his defenses, find white knights, complicate the ownership structure further. My father leveraged his network, called in favors, pulled strings I didn't even know existed. He wasn't just doing this for me. He was doing it with a cold calculation of a seasoned businessman who saw a unique opportunity presented wrapped in a convenient package of personal justice. This wasn't revenge fueled by blind emotion. It was strategy sharpened by a father's quiet fury. I wasn't just a passive recipient of his help anymore. I became a key player. My intimate knowledge of the business was invaluable. I provided insights into his decision-making processes, his blind spots, his ego. I helped identify key shareholders who might be susceptible to an offer, crucial suppliers whose contracts might be vulnerable, specific debts that were coming due. My bitterness became fuel, my pain a perverse kind of clarity. I saw him not as the man I had loved, but as a target, a problem to be solved. The legal preparations were intricate. Shell corporations, non-disclosure agreements that felt like something out of a spy novel, carefully worded offers designed to avoid triggering any early warning systems.
It was a race against time.
His wedding to Victoria was planned for the fall. He was likely rushing the divorce settlement, trying to push me out completely before then. We had to move faster. There were moments of doubt, of crushing fear. What if it failed? What if he found out? The repercussions could be immense. My father was risking significant capital, his reputation. And I was risking the last vestiges of my peace of mind. The pressure was immense. Sleep remained elusive, but now it was from adrenaline and plotting, not just despair. The deepening crisis arrived in waves. His lawyers became more aggressive, filing motions that felt designed purely to harass and drain me. Financial restrictions tightened further. I had to sell small things, pieces of furniture that held memories, just to cover immediate expenses and legal fees. Each sale felt like another chip away at my identity, another victory for him. He was succeeding in making me feel destitute, powerless. Victoria started showing up places I used to go. My regular coffee shop, the grocery store, even the park where I used to walk our dog, the dog he also kept. She wouldn't speak to me, but she would make sure I saw her, usually looking happy, radiant, often on the phone, presumably with him. It was a deliberate act of psychological warfare, a constant reminder of what I had lost and what she had gained. It fueled the cold fire in my gut. Then came a letter from his lawyers. A final offer. A pittance, insultingly low, contingent on me signing a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from ever speaking about the marriage, the business, or the circumstances of the divorce. It was clear, take the crumbs and disappear, or be buried in legal fees and public humiliation. The deadline was tight. He wanted this over. He was getting impatient. This was the moment. The window of opportunity was closing. My father looked at the letter, his face grim. He's pushing, he stated simply. He thinks he has you cornered. We had the plan ready. The funding secured. The legal documents drafted, sitting in sealed envelopes, waiting for the signal. This offer, this final act of arrogance from my husband, was the signal. We proceed, my father said. There was no hesitation in his voice. Just quiet resolve. My turning point wasn't a sudden burst of strength, but a quiet click into place. Standing in my father's study, looking at the complex web of charts and legal documents that represented our counterstrike, I felt the last pieces of the old me fall away. The hurt, the grief, the longing for a past that was a lie, they were still there, but they were overlaid by a layer of steely resolve. He wanted a war? He had won. And I was no longer just a casualty. I was a participant. I would not just survive. I would be the one who delivered the final, decisive blow. The climax unfolded not in a courtroom, but in the boardroom, the very room where he had told me I get nothing. It was scheduled as a routine, albeit tense, meeting to discuss the final divorce settlement proposal. My lawyer was there, his lawyer was there, he was there, and so was Victoria, looking particularly smug, perched on a chair like a queen already on her throne. My father was also present, ostensibly as my advisor, a silent observer. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. My husband looked confident, almost bored. He clearly expected me to accept his meager offer, sign the papers, and vanish. His lawyer laid out the terms again, rehashing the points about the business being his sole property, my lack of contribution, an infuriating lie delivered with a straight face, the generosity of his settlement offer a laughable insult. I sat quietly, my hands clasped in my lap, my gaze fixed on my husband's face. I saw the arrogance there, the complete conviction of his victory. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. He spoke to his lawyer, to my lawyer, addressing the air around me but never me directly. Victoria occasionally whispered something in his ear, and he would nod, a small, private smile playing on his lips. They were already a unit, a team, united in their dismissal of me. My lawyer finished his polite refutation of their claims, outlining the points we would contest, hinting at a long, drawn-out legal battle we wouldn't back down from. It was part of the act, the expected choreography of divorce negotiations. My husband just sighed, looking at his watch. Frankly, he said, cutting off my lawyer mid-sentence, his voice dripping with condescension, this is a waste of time. The offer is more than fair, considering. The business is mine. Always has been. She had no stake in it. Legally, ethically, factually, he paused, his eyes finally flicking to mine, a cold, hard glint in them.
You get
nothing. Take the offer, or we drag this through the courts for years. You'll spend everything you have, and still end up with 0-inch. Victoria nodded beside him, that same smug smile plastered on her face. It was a picture of absolute victory, painted in shades of cruelty and contempt. Then my father spoke. His voice was quiet, calm, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Actually, son," he said, using the term with an irony so subtle it was almost imperceptible, "that's not entirely accurate anymore." My husband turned to him, a flicker of annoyance on his face. "Excuse me? Who are you two?" "I am," my father interrupted, still calm, "as of precisely 9 a.m. this morning, the majority shareholder of your company." Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. My husband's jaw went slack. Victoria's smile vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. My lawyer froze, his eyes wide. My father continued, his voice gaining a touch of steel. "Your recent acquisitions, your debt load, you left yourself exposed. A hostile takeover, executed swiftly and discreetly, becomes quite manageable under those circumstances. We've been acquiring shares, calling in options, leveraging certain, shall we say, relationships you might have overlooked. It was finalized this morning." He gestured to his briefcase. "The papers are all here." He laid a thick file on the table. My husband stared at it as if it were a bomb. "That's impossible," my husband stammered, his face draining of color. "You can't." "I would have known. We were very careful," my father said mildly. "As I said, discreet. Your focus, understandably, has been elsewhere." His gaze flicked, almost imperceptibly, to Victoria. The implication hung heavy in the air. While he was distracted by his affair, his new life, his efforts to destroy mine, the ground was being systematically dug out from under him. His overconfidence, his tunnel vision, had been his undoing. Furthermore, my father added, leaning forward slightly, his voice hardening, "As the new majority shareholder, the board has convened an emergency meeting. Were the CEO." He paused, letting the past tense sink in. "The board has decided to accept your resignation, effective immediately. There are discrepancies in the recent financial reports. Concerns about fiduciary responsibility. An investigation is underway. We'll be in touch regarding the process." My husband stared at him, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. He looked like a man who had just been hit by a train he never saw coming. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "As for Miss Victoria here," my father continued, his gaze shifting to her, his tone devoid of warmth, "your position was terminated an hour ago. Security is, I believe, currently escorting you from the premises." Victoria gasped, a small, sharp sound. She looked at my husband, then at my father, then back at my husband, her face a mask of horror. The carefully constructed facade of the woman who understood him, who was building a future with him, crumbled in an instant. She wasn't just losing her future marriage, she was losing her job, her access, her position. My husband still hadn't spoken. He just stared at the file, then at my father, then at me. His chest hitched. He made a strange, choked sound. His face, which had gone pale, now seemed to flush a dangerous red. He clutched at his chest, his eyes wide with shock and something else, terror?
Pain.
He gasped again, a ragged sound, and then, slowly, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, he crumpled. He slid from the chair, hitting the carpeted floor with a thud. Victoria cried out, scrambling to his side. His lawyer rushed over, fumbling for phone. My father watched, his expression unreadable. He didn't move towards the fallen man. Neither did I. We simply watched as the man who had told me I get nothing collapsed, losing everything, in the room where he had delivered his cruel pronouncement. The silence returned, but this time it was heavy with the weight of shattered hubris and sudden, brutal consequence. The chaos that followed was a blur of shouting, paramedics, and the sudden, ignominious departure of Victoria and his lawyer, who looked less concerned about their client and more concerned about their own positions. I stayed in the boardroom with my father. We sat in the silence after they took him away, the air still vibrating with the shock. There was no triumphant cheering, no celebratory champagne. Just a profound, heavy quiet. My father looked at me. There was something akin to pride in his eyes, but it was tempered with a deep understanding of the cost. "It's done," he said quietly. It was done. The man who had tried to erase me, who had promised me nothing, had lost the very thing he valued above all else. The business. His kingdom. And he had lost it because of his own actions, his own overreach, his own blind spot created by his betrayal. The plot twist wasn't some external force intervening. It was his own foundation collapsing under the weight of his ambition and deceit, triggered by a strategic mind that saw the weakness he created. He was blindsided not by luck, but by a plan executed using the very vulnerabilities he created for himself. He thought he had cornered me with his power. He had only revealed the weak points in his own armor. He aimed the gun at me, but I stepped aside, and he was left holding it, pointing at himself. The aftermath wasn't simple. There were legal battles, of course, though the terms changed dramatically. With my father in control of the business, my position in the divorce proceedings shifted entirely. The narrative changed. I wasn't a discarded wife seeking handouts. I was connected to the new power structure, privy to the discrepancies being uncovered. The settlement talks were swift and decidedly not in his favor. He survived the collapse physically, but his spirit, his certainty, seemed permanently broken. He lost the business he'd built, his reputation tarnished by the internal investigation and the messy, public fallout. Victoria, I heard, disappeared from the scene entirely, having hitched her wagon to the wrong star. What did I get? Not the business itself. My father folded it into his existing operations, restructuring, making changes. He offered me a position, a senior role, leveraging my deep knowledge of the company. It was tempting. It felt like claiming territory that was rightfully mine. But standing in the hallways of that building, the air still carrying the faint scent of stale ambition and betrayal, I realized I didn't want it.
Not like that.
Not the ghost of what had been. My real gain wasn't financial, though the settlement was fair, finally acknowledging my contribution. My gain was the reclaiming of myself. He had tried to make me nothing. But in surviving his assault, in fighting back, not with his weapons but with strategy and quiet strength, I had become something new. Something tougher, something clearer. I used the settlement to start my own small venture, something completely independent, something built from the ground up with my own hands, for myself. It's not as big, not as flashy, but it's mine. And there are no ghosts in its hallways. The pain never fully goes away. The scar tissue remains. There are moments when the memory of his betrayal, of that cold pronouncement, catches me off guard. But it no longer defines me. The story isn't about being a victim. It's about finding strength when you think you have none left. It's about the quiet power of knowing where the vulnerabilities lie and waiting for the right moment. It's about how someone who thinks they have all the power can collapse when their own foundation gives way. And sometimes, late at night, I remember that look on his face as he fell. The pure, unadulterated shock. The moment he realized that you get nothing had boomeranged, ricocheting back to hit him harder than he ever could have imagined. There is a cold, quiet satisfaction in that memory. It doesn't erase the pain, but it balances the scales just a little. It was a harsh lesson, learned at immense cost. But I learned it, and I survived. And I got far more than nothing. I got my life back. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.